Ben Norton, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for being back on. I think it's been over 2 years since the last time we spoke, and a lot has happened since then, obviously, that I'd like to cover. But one thing that I wanted to discuss with you today actually was something that recently has been happening to my channel. I've been having videos deleted by YouTube, and I actually wasn't able to post to my channel for a week. And I just have to imagine a channel like the Gray Zones. I mean, you guys are breaking all kinds of stories, really taking on imperialism to, quite a degree. So I have to imagine that a channel like yours is being censored as well. Have you guys had any videos deleted or any other kind of like view throttling or anything like that going on?
Well, it's hard to tell in terms of throttling. Definitely, we've seen as the algorithms have changed over the years, we've seen fluctuations where sometimes we'll get a good amount of views, and then when the algorithm changes, there's like this wall and it's harder for us to get views. That has definitely impacted us, which is a softer form of censorship. In terms of the censorship we faced at the Gray Zone channel, I mean, fortunately, there hasn't been a lot of hard censorship, but there's constant demonetization, of course. I mean, like half of our videos are demonetized, and usually they're demonetized instantly, pretty much all of them. And then what you have to do is, of course, you have to do an appeal, and then only about half of them or less are actually monetized. And then in terms of other forms of censorship, we've done a few videos that like documentaries that were censored, and those are really frustrating because they're not taken off, but what they do is they put up this notice that you have to log in and like give them your social security number and the blood of your firstborn child to watch the video. You know what I mean? Like they say like there's this video is like not appropriate or something. And they did that to a documentary we did in Bolivia, which we put a lot of work into. It was reporting on the ground in Bolivia about the coup and the coup regime's massacres. And then they did that for a video that like a 15-minute documentary that Max and I did about the coup attempt in Nicaragua. And they say that, it's like, it's too sensitive or whatever, even though there's no blood in it. So there's a lot of ways that they censor the content, but I have seen recently that you have been facing even more ridiculous censorship. So it's really just ridiculous that these big tech companies, especially Google, have just become so flagrant in censoring videos and putting strikes on channels, especially for videos that are often from like 5 years ago. It's clear that they're going through channels and trying to find a video that supposedly violates their guidelines, because how else would they find this video from like 5 years ago?
Well, the timing for me too, it was the issue, because what happened was I was given a warning because there was a patron question to Cynthia McKinney having to do with the 2020 election. So it wasn't even something I was asking. I wasn't giving an answer to a question. I was just reading a question to Cynthia McKinney. So they gave me a warning because of that. And then about a week later, I think I received a strike for a video that was posted almost 4 years ago. So obviously, they wanted to, I guess, send a strong message, I guess, which is why they did that. But, I've seen my views throttled since this summer, just because I saw a huge spike, especially with certain guests that I'd have on, in June, July, and then just it dropped off a cliff. And I've had big guests on since then. I've had Glenn Greenwald on the show, Noam Chomsky, Max has been on a couple times, Jimmy Dore has been back on, and it's just getting suppressed more and more and more, to the point now where most of my views are actually coming from subscribers instead of non-subscribers, which is, the reverse of how it should be. But personally, the actions that I've kind of taken to respond to that is I'm no longer posting full interviews to YouTube. I'm posting them on Rumble and as a podcast on iTunes and Spotify. I've actually been speaking with people at Rockfin about doing a new show there that would be exclusive to Rockfin. So, that's something else I'm considering. But for yourself, I mean, how have you kind of worked around this censorship from YouTube? And, also I would ask, I guess, in regards to Facebook and Twitter also.
Well, I mean, I just keep doing my work, and the big tech corporations are going to keep censoring like they always do, especially on Facebook. I mean, I have many thousands of followers on Facebook, and I've recently noticed that they clearly changed their algorithm, because I used to get way more engagement, way more shares, way more likes, and now it's often in the single digits. So, I mean, that's how these big tech corporations work. They're arms of the US government, basically. And I'm not really gonna change what I do necessarily because I'm a journalist and I think I'm reporting on important topics. And there's certain things you can do to like be careful with your language, but that's how these big
I mean,
tech
it's kind of
platforms are.
sucks to self-censor. I mean, honestly, like, to be perfectly honest, I think I have kind of self-censored, a little bit, like I don't say certain things, or I have edited out like certain phrases that people have used that I thought, could be taken the wrong way, like the clip could be taken out of context or something. But to go to the extent where you're going to say that you can't even have, or let's just say it was me, that you couldn't ask a question to a former Democratic congresswoman about an election, like that's just a whole nother level of censorship.
Yeah, again, I mean, these big tech platforms have continuously showed themselves just to be basically arms of the US government. That that's the role they play. And like many things in the US government, which is the epitome of neoliberalism, it's outsourced, right? So there's this plausible deniability where they can say, well, we're an independent corporation, we're not the government. But I mean, the RAND Corporation is technically an independent corporation, but it's an arm of the State Department, an arm of the Defense Department. The RAND Corporation is funded by the Pentagon to create policy for the U.S. military, just as big tech corporations. They're not technically part of the government, but they're U.S. contractors usually. In the case of Google, let's not forget, Google, which owns YouTube, is a CIA contractor. It's a Pentagon contractor. It worked with the Pentagon in the Iraq War for mapping. It works with many US police departments and the FBI on domestic surveillance. For all intents and purposes, Google is not only a US contractor, it is an arm of the US government. And that's also true for Facebook. I mean, just because a corporation is technically independent doesn't mean anything, because that's how the US government operates. Everything is a public-private partnership between the state and corporations, because that's what capitalism is. It's the dictatorship of the capitalist class. It rules the state. The capitalists rule the state.
So do you think it makes sense to try to transition onto other platforms like Rumble and Rockfin, or is that just, do you think that's fruitless?
No, I don't think it's fruitless. I think we have to understand that unless these platforms are ideologically driven, and I dispute the extent to which they are ideologically driven, I think that they recognize that there's a market for YouTube alternatives and they're filling that market. But if push came to shove and the US government threatened to censor them, they would probably play ball because they're US based companies. So what it comes down to is geopolitics, which is why I always talk about geopolitics. And it's a lot of people on the US left refuse to recognize that US based corporations are going to follow US geopolitical guidelines. They're going to toe the line of US foreign policy, because otherwise the US government is going to take action against them. And that's the only time we ever see the US government regulate corporations, is when they're challenging US foreign policy, when they're doing business with Iran, when they're doing business with Cuba. That's the only time they're ever regulated. They're not regulated when they defraud investors. They're not regulated when they defraud clients and lie to clients as the big banks did, when they give them junk mortgages, when they, just carry out these blatantly abusive practices. They're never regulated. They're only regulated when they challenge US foreign policy. And that's exactly how big tech is too. I mean, there is a market right now for all of these alternatives to YouTube, and we should be using all those platforms because we should try to get our message out on as many platforms as we can. I mean, we cross-post our videos with the Gray Zone on as many platforms as we can. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we should do that because the goal is to have as big of an audience as we could get as alternative media journalists. But I mean, the reality is that if it's a US based company, it's going to play ball with the US government. And if it doesn't, it's going to be destroyed. And we even see, media outlets like WikiLeaks, which has never been based in the US. We've seen the war that the US has waged against WikiLeaks. So I don't expect necessarily these companies to, at the end of the day, be significantly better. But the reality is that to the extent that they have an audience, and to the extent that they don't censor right now, I mean, we should use them.
Something that I also wonder is, we haven't had a large military conflict in the social media era. Like the Iraq War was about 20 years ago, and we haven't had something that big since then. Do you think that if we do see another, large-scale military operation, a war like the Iraq War, do you think that we could, see a lot of people just being completely deplatformed. Folks like you and me, Jimmy Dore, Lee Camp, like the anti-imperialist left. Do you think they could just be completely wiped off the internet?
Absolutely, immediately, within the first week, no question whatsoever. And why do I say that so confidently? Look what happened when Trump, in an act of war, a war crime against international law, murdered one of the top Iranian officials, Qasem Soleimani. What was the response of Facebook, which owns Instagram as well? They began censoring anyone who said anything positive in any remote, anything that could be construed as remotely positive about Qasem Soleimani. So, friend of the show, I think you've had her on, Rania Khalek, a good friend of mine, great journalist. She went to Iraq and posted on Instagram a photo of like this billboard they had of the spot where Qasem Soleimani, and also, by the way, a top Iraqi military official, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who was the head of the Popular Mobilization Forces, which fought ISIS and which have a relationship with the Iraqi government. They were both murdered by this U.S. drone strike. Rania Khalek posted a billboard. She didn't even like comment on it. It was just a journalistic photo, and it was censored on Instagram. So that's just a little hint of what's coming. If there's a conventional war over Ukraine or something, if the U.S. is a conventional war with Russia or China, Russia and China or Iran, there's no question they're going to censor people challenging the U.S. government narrative. They're already doing it, and there's not even this full-on conventional war that could potentially be on the horizon. So they've been priming it. They've been getting prepared for this for many years. And again, when the rubber hits the road and when these corporations face pressure from the US government, of course, they're always going to concede.